The day Zainab laughed at her own future pain was the same day the winds of Ibadan whispered that life has a way of turning tables. She did not know it then, but the eyes that smiled at her wedding were already plotting in shadows. That very morning, as the sun spread gold over the old streets and busy markets of the city, Zainab was full of joy, her heart a bird in flight. She had never imagined such happiness would land in her lap, nor that it would be threatened by those closest to her husband. Zainab lived with her mother and younger brother in a small home in a quiet neighborhood of Ibadan. Her life had been humble but happy. She walked through the dusty streets with a basket of yams balanced on her head, always greeting neighbors with warmth. Her laughter was infectious, and even in the face of struggle, she carried a quiet pride in her dignity. She had met Kola at a local market months earlier, a handsome young man from Lagos whose family wealth was whispered about even in Ibadan. Unlike the other rich young men who scorned the poor, Kola had smiled at her, laughed at her jokes, and treated her as an equal. Their love had grown quietly, like a small fire in the night, unnoticed by many but fierce in its warmth. Kola's mother, Mama Kola, had been skeptical at first, concerned that her son had brought home a bride who came from nothing. But Kola had insisted, his eyes firm with determination. "I love her," he had said, "and love is worth more than gold." Zainab, shy and humble, had never believed she could enter a world so different from her own, where marble floors shone and servants moved silently in white gloves. She was thrilled but nervous, knowing that in those grand houses, jealousy was as common as the dust in the streets. The wedding day was a spectacle that brought the city's eyes to Lagos. Music echoed through the halls, drums beating like the heartbeat of the earth. Friends and relatives danced in colorful fabrics, laughter floating above like a kite in the wind. Zainab, in a simple but elegant white dress, held Kola's hand tightly, feeling the warmth of love in every pulse. Kola's eyes never left her face, admiration clear, unhidden. It was a perfect day, the kind children dream of when their mothers tell stories of happy endings. But shadows move silently, and not every smile is honest. Kola's siblings, Bisi and Sola, watched from the sidelines, their smiles sharp and thin. They whispered to each other, voices like the hiss of snakes. "She cannot belong here," Bisi said, her eyes narrowing as she observed Zainab. "She is too simple, too humble. People like us do not allow others to rise above our expectations." Sola nodded, a faint smirk playing on his lips. They envied the attention, the love, the promise of respect that Zainab had won from their brother. Jealousy is a slow poison, and it had already entered their hearts. During the ceremony, Zainab bowed politely to the family elders, her hands trembling slightly with nervous excitement. Mama Kola smiled, but her eyes flickered with uncertainty. She had seen other brides before, women of wealth or social status, and she knew the harsh words and rumors that could destroy a young woman's spirit in a home like theirs. Zainab, however, did not notice the subtle glances, the whispered doubts. She was in love and eager to begin her new life. The reception was a blend of laughter and music, a sea of colors and chatter. Guests congratulated the couple, and Zainab felt like she was in a dream, walking among flowers that smelled of hope. For a moment, she let herself forget that envy existed, that some smiles could hide daggers. Kola led her to dance, their steps in perfect rhythm, and even Bisi and Sola had to applaud, though their eyes were cold. It was during this celebration that the first small warning came, almost invisible to everyone but the keenest eyes. A waiter accidentally spilled wine near Zainab's dress, and Sola's laugh was louder than necessary, drawing attention as if mocking the young bride. Bisi whispered to a friend, a sly smirk curving her lips, "She thinks she is part of this world, but she is just a guest here." Zainab smiled politely, unaware of the poison threading its way through the day. By evening, as the music faded and the stars began to pierce the Lagos sky, Kola and Zainab slipped away from the crowd for a quiet moment. They walked along the balcony, hands entwined, hearts beating as one. Zainab leaned her head on Kola's shoulder and whispered, "I feel like this happiness could last forever." Kola held her close, replying softly, "It will, as long as we stay strong together." Little did they know, strength would be tested in ways they could not imagine. That night, while Zainab dreamed of a life filled with love, the seeds of jealousy were already being planted. Bisi and Sola would not rest until they had shattered her peace. They were patient, cunning, and cruel, the perfect storm of envy in human form. And so, the story of Zainab began, a story where love, hope, betrayal, and vengeance would collide like thunder over the hills of Africa. She was about to learn that even in joy, danger can wait silently, and the people closest to you can become the architects of your heartbreak. Zainab thought that leaving Ibadan for Lagos would bring her closer to Kola, that the marble floors and tall windows of his family's mansion would feel like a new beginning. But happiness, she soon discovered, could be heavy when it was weighed down by envy. From the first day she entered the house, she felt eyes on her that were not curious but calculating, cold and sharp. Bisi and Sola, her husband's siblings, greeted her with polite smiles that did not reach their eyes. Every step she took was observed, every word she spoke measured, and every move she made silently judged. The mansion was a world apart from the simple streets of Ibadan where she had grown up. The floors shone like rivers of light, and servants moved silently through the halls, carrying trays of silver and crystal. Zainab had never seen such wealth, and while she admired it, a quiet fear settled in her chest. She was grateful to Kola, yes, but she sensed a tension she could not yet name. Kola was warm and loving, always holding her hand and reassuring her with gentle words, but he seemed unaware of the small fires that had already begun to smolder in his own home. Bisi was the first to act. She would wait until Zainab served tea or arranged flowers and then make a comment in passing, sharp and cutting but disguised as advice. "You know, not everyone likes someone who tries too hard," she said once, as if speaking to a friend, while her eyes glimmered with hidden malice. Sola would follow, often dropping a word or two about how inexperienced Zainab was, how she might be spoiling their brother with foolish love. And Mama Kola, tired and soft-spoken, seemed unsure of where her loyalty should lie. She had always been obedient to her children, and slowly, Bisi and Sola began to weave their web, pulling Mama Kola into their whispers. At first, Zainab tried to ignore it. She smiled politely, helped in the kitchen, and tried to earn trust, thinking that kindness could cure suspicion. She kept her head down, believing love was enough to protect her. But jealousy, she would soon learn, is not so easily swayed by kindness. Bisi and Sola whispered stories of Zainab's supposed laziness to servants, made subtle jokes in front of Kola, and hinted that she was unfit for his world. At first, Kola laughed them off. "She is learning," he said, thinking his siblings were merely teasing. But every word, every smile hidden behind a lie, added weight to the scales of doubt. One evening, the siblings staged a small gathering in the mansion's grand hall, inviting close friends and family. Zainab, ever eager to please, had baked treats for the guests and dressed carefully in the modest yet elegant clothes Kola loved on her. She arrived at the gathering, carrying trays of delicacies with a shy smile, only to notice the quick exchange of glances between Bisi and Sola. Her heart sank, though she did not understand why. The siblings began to speak in hushed tones near the edge of the hall, drawing attention to minor imperfections, how Zainab had spilled tea, how she had mispronounced a word, how she was too simple for such refined company. Kola, busy entertaining guests, did not notice the seeds being planted. But Mama Kola's unease was evident. She whispered to Bisi, "Perhaps she needs more guidance," as if Zainab were a child rather than her son's wife. Zainab, feeling small and out of place, excused herself quietly, taking a moment on the balcony to breathe. Lagos glimmered below her, a city of lights and dreams, yet the brightness felt cold. She wondered why happiness always seemed to come with hidden knives. The weeks that followed were worse. Every act of kindness from Zainab was twisted into criticism, every mistake amplified. If she tried to help in the kitchen, Sola would comment on her slowness. If she spoke to the servants with warmth, Bisi would claim she was trying to manipulate them. Slowly, Kola began to see shadows of doubt, not fully believing the stories, but letting worry creep into his mind. Zainab noticed the subtle change in his gaze, the hesitation, the quiet questioning. And though she wanted to confront him, she feared that anger would only give the siblings power over her. One afternoon, Zainab was organizing books in the library when Sola appeared, carrying a folder of papers. "I hope you know how serious this is," he said casually, sliding a few sheets across the table. "People are saying things that might hurt Kola's reputation." Zainab looked down and saw words that twisted truth, insinuations that she had been careless, disrespectful, and even dishonest. Her heart pounded. She realized then that jealousy was no longer hidden, it had become a weapon, and she was its target. Zainab wanted to cry, wanted to run back to the safe streets of Ibadan, but she forced herself to breathe. She reminded herself of her love for Kola, of the life they had dreamed together. She resolved not to let the venom of others poison her spirit. Still, the mansion felt colder now, the smiles sharper, the shadows longer. Every knock at the door, every whispered laugh behind her back, reminded her that the battle had already begun. That night, as Zainab lay beside Kola, she felt the first real sting of fear. She wanted to speak, to tell him everything, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. Kola, exhausted from entertaining guests, kissed her forehead softly, murmuring, "Everything will be fine, my love." Zainab closed her eyes, but her mind raced with plans to survive the silent war. She did not yet know that these small attacks would soon escalate, that the party of whispers and accusations would turn into a storm strong enough to break her marriage. The night of the family party in Lagos was meant to be a celebration, a gathering of wealth, laughter, and music that could rival the stars themselves. But for Zainab, it would become a night she would never forget, the night when jealousy turned into cruelty and her marriage teetered on the edge of ruin. From the moment she stepped into the grand hall, the air seemed heavier than usual, filled with whispered glances, forced smiles, and the quiet hum of scheming hearts. She wore a gown of soft ivory, simple yet elegant, a gift from Kola she had admired for weeks. She thought it might make his family like her more, unaware that some hearts were already closed to her forever. Bisi and Sola had prepared meticulously. Every detail, every guest, every whisper, had been calculated to break her down in front of the people who mattered most. They knew how to use envy like a knife, precise, silent, and deadly. Even Mama Kola, swayed by her children's manipulations, looked at Zainab with hesitation, a hint of doubt in her eyes. Zainab's heart beat faster, not knowing yet that the smiles around her were masks, and the hands extended in greeting were guided by hidden agendas. The evening began with music and dancing, the kind of lively rhythms that make feet move before the heart can catch up. Guests mingled, praising the family's success, speaking of wealth, prosperity, and legacy. Zainab, always eager to belong, moved among the guests with grace, offering drinks, exchanging pleasantries, smiling with warmth. But every compliment she received from outsiders was twisted into criticism by those closest to her. Sola leaned close to Kola, speaking softly, "Do you see how everyone looks at her? It is unbecoming. People will talk." Kola, distracted by the conversation and the laughter around him, shrugged, not noticing the venom in Sola's words. Bisi's plan came into full effect after dinner. She had arranged for a few friends to create a minor scandal, enough to make Zainab appear careless and disrespectful without immediately raising suspicion. A servant was bribed to accidentally spill a drink on the floor near Zainab, while a few guests were prompted to exaggerate the incident. When it happened, Zainab gasped and bent to clean the mess, embarrassed but trying to maintain composure. Laughter followed, but Bisi's laugh was louder, calculated, drawing attention to the mistake as if it were evidence of incompetence. Sola took his part further, whispering exaggerated stories about Zainab's attitude to nearby guests. "She is very beautiful, yes," he said with a smile, "but perhaps not as polite as one would expect in such a household." The words were subtle, but they planted doubt, the kind that grows in the dark until it poisons even the strongest bonds. Kola noticed the shift in the room but could not yet see the trap forming. He took Zainab's hand, smiling reassuringly. "Ignore them, my love. It is nothing serious." But the trap was far from over. Bisi and Sola had arranged a few photographs to be accidentally discovered by Kola's friends. They were staged images, showing Zainab in moments of harmless distraction, framed as inappropriate behavior. Kola's heart began to waver as murmurs spread among his peers. Even Mama Kola's voice, usually gentle, carried doubt. "Are you sure she is careful with our reputation?" she asked softly, almost pleading. Zainab's eyes widened in shock. "I would never," she tried to explain, but the words caught in her throat. The turning point came when Sola approached Kola, feigning concern. "Brother, I would never interfere, but some of your guests are talking. You must act quickly before the situation worsens." Kola's face darkened, a mixture of embarrassment and anger stirring within him. He had trusted his siblings, thinking their intentions were honorable, and now the whispers of scandal made him question the woman he loved. Zainab's protests were gentle, full of sincerity, but they could not compete with the chorus of deception orchestrated by Bisi and Sola. By the time the evening ended, the damage had been done. Kola confronted Zainab in front of the remaining guests, his voice tight with shame and frustration. "Why did you let this happen?" he demanded. Zainab, trembling, tried to explain the truth, the innocence of her actions, but every word seemed to fall on ears hardened by jealousy. I didn't," she stammered, but Kola's pride and wounded ego drowned her pleas. The siblings watched with satisfaction, their eyes gleaming with triumph as Zainab's face paled under the weight of humiliation. When the guests departed, Zainab gathered her things quietly, feeling the sting of betrayal as her world collapsed around her. Kola's silence was heavier than words. He did not strike her, but the distance in his eyes was a blade, cutting deeper than any shout or accusation could. Mama Kola looked away, unable to intervene, leaving Zainab to the mercy of the siblings' triumph. That night, Zainab left the mansion, walking into the dark Lagos streets, carrying not only her belongings but the weight of a shattered marriage. Her heart ached with grief, but a spark of quiet determination burned within her chest. She would survive, somehow, she promised herself. The siblings returned to the house, whispering in satisfaction. "She is gone," Bisi said, her voice low but victorious. "Now Kola can focus on the family, on the life he deserves." Sola nodded, but even as they celebrated, a shadow of unease flickered in their hearts. They had won, yes, but envy often leaves a scar that no victory can heal. The streets of Ibadan never looked the same to Zainab. The city she had left with pride now felt cold, unforgiving, and harsh. Her feet, once light with the joy of marriage, now dragged along the dusty roads, carrying the weight of humiliation that had been thrust upon her. She had no home to return to in Lagos, no family who could stand by her against the cunning cruelty of Bisi and Sola. The house where she had dreamed of love, laughter, and acceptance now existed only in memory, a place of betrayal etched deeply into her heart. Zainab returned to her own small home, where her mother and brother welcomed her with tears and open arms. They had always known her heart was strong, but even they could not erase the sting of her public disgrace. Neighbors whispered as she walked past, curious glances following her, sometimes pitying, sometimes judging. "She married into wealth," they murmured, "and yet see how quickly it turned against her." Every word, every stare, felt like a reminder of the life she had lost before it had even truly begun. Days turned into weeks, and Zainab's strength was tested beyond what she had imagined. Money was scarce, and finding work that could sustain her was a constant battle. She tried small trades, selling fruit in the market, helping neighbors with chores, but the shame she carried in her chest made each task heavier than it needed to be. Every time she thought of Kola, her heart ached, not only for lost love but for the betrayal of trust. She wondered how a man she loved so deeply could believe lies so easily, how those who smiled in his family could wield jealousy like a weapon so effectively. Yet life, even in its harshness, often brings unexpected encounters. One afternoon, while Zainab sat quietly by the river market, counting coins she had earned from selling vegetables, a man approached. He was calm, composed, and his presence seemed to command attention without words. His name was Adewale, and he carried an air of quiet understanding. Unlike others who had glanced at her with pity or judgment, he looked at her with respect, his eyes holding neither mockery nor superiority. "You have strength," he said gently, sitting beside her without pretense. "Even when life has turned against you, it has not crushed you completely." Zainab stared at him, unsure how to respond. It was the first time in weeks that someone had spoken to her not as a failure or victim, but as a person with potential. She felt a flicker of something she had nearly forgotten, hope. Adewale offered her work, not charity. He had a small business in Ibadan, one that needed careful management and trustworthy hands. "I will not give you pity," he said, "only opportunity. If you can learn, you can rise again." Zainab hesitated, pride warring with desperation. But with nothing left to lose, she accepted. That moment, small and quiet, would become the first step on a journey that would surprise everyone who had ever doubted her. Days turned into months. Zainab worked tirelessly, learning quickly and earning the respect of Adewale and his clients. She discovered that her humility, patience, and intelligence, once overlooked or belittled, were in fact her greatest strengths. Every mistake was a lesson, every small success a reminder that life was not yet over. At night, she dreamed of Lagos, of Kola, of the family who had betrayed her, but she no longer allowed despair to claim her spirit. Slowly, quietly, Zainab began to transform her pain into power. Meanwhile, in Lagos, Bisi and Sola celebrated their apparent victory. They believed Zainab was gone forever, humiliated and powerless, a reminder of what jealousy and cunning could achieve. Kola, too, struggled in silence. The mansion felt emptier without her warmth, her laughter, and her care. Yet the siblings whispered assurances, convincing themselves that pride and wealth were enough to fill the gaps she had left. But life, like the African rivers, flows with secrets and currents that no one can control. Zainab's success was not sudden, but it was steady. Each day she grew stronger, more confident, more capable. She helped Adewale expand his business, organize community projects, and slowly built a reputation as someone not only resilient but brilliant. Her humility, which had been mocked in Lagos, became her greatest asset in Ibadan. People came to respect her, seek her advice, and admire the dignity with which she faced life's hardships. And yet, Zainab never forgot. She never allowed anger to cloud her judgment, but she carried the lessons of betrayal in her heart. Every whispered lie, every cruel joke, every glance of envy from Bisi and Sola remained as reminders of what human hearts are capable of when jealousy rules. But she understood something they did not, that strength is built not in moments of triumph, but in the quiet, difficult hours when no one is watching, when every choice is made alone. Zainab's days in Ibadan became a rhythm of steady work and quiet determination. Each morning, she woke before the sun, walking along the dusty streets to Adewale's small office. Her hands, once accustomed to gentle care and domestic tasks, now learned the weight of responsibility, handling ledgers, organizing shipments, and speaking to clients with confidence she had never known before. With each passing day, she felt the small fire in her chest grow stronger, a fire that whispered, "I will rise, and no one will ever underestimate me again." Adewale was patient, a calm presence who guided her without patronizing. "Do not rush yourself," he said one afternoon as they walked past the bustling market. "Great things take time, but when they come, they last." Zainab nodded, though her mind often drifted to Lagos, the house that had been hers, the family that had betrayed her, and Kola, whose silence had once cut deeper than any insult. But now she could think of them without despair. She had learned that life does not owe answers, and revenge, if it comes, must be quiet and powerful. Months turned into years. Zainab grew not only in skill but in reputation. She became known in Ibadan for her honesty, her keen mind, and her ability to handle even the most difficult clients with grace. Adewale's small business began to flourish under her management, expanding into neighboring towns and slowly attracting attention from larger investors. She no longer walked the streets as a timid, humiliated woman, she moved with purpose, and people noticed. Respect replaced pity, admiration replaced whispers. Meanwhile, back in Lagos, the mansion seemed colder with each passing day. Bisi and Sola had believed their victory was complete, that Zainab was gone from their lives forever. But life has a way of balancing its scales. Business ventures they had invested in began to fail, minor illnesses struck family members, and even Kola found himself restless and discontented. He missed Zainab's warmth, her laughter, and the quiet wisdom she had brought to his life. But pride and the venom of his siblings kept him from admitting it, leaving him to suffer silently while they congratulated themselves on their cunning. Word of Zainab's growing success began to circulate even in Lagos. A mutual acquaintance mentioned her name at a business dinner, careful not to reveal details. "Have you heard about the woman from Ibadan?" someone whispered. "She is rising quickly, quietly, but with strength that commands attention." The words were small, but in the hearts of Bisi and Sola, they planted unease. No one had expected the woman they had humiliated to return so quietly, so deliberately, to power. One afternoon, Zainab sat with Adewale in their new office, a modest but growing space filled with the scent of fresh paint and polished wood. She looked out the window at the streets of Ibadan bustling below, thinking of how far she had come. "Do you remember the day I walked into Lagos as a wife?" she asked softly, almost to herself. Adewale smiled, knowing the weight behind her words. "I do," he said. "And you have turned every challenge into a step forward. You have become stronger than you realize." It was not strength born of anger, but of endurance. Every insult, every whispered lie, every act of betrayal had been carefully stored in her memory, not as a weapon for revenge but as lessons for wisdom. Zainab had learned patience in silence, strategy in adversity, and courage in the face of despair. She had transformed humiliation into discipline, weakness into skill, and sorrow into opportunity. As the years passed, her influence grew beyond Ibadan. Investors sought her counsel, local authorities recognized her integrity, and young women in her community began to look up to her as a symbol of resilience. Every success was a quiet statement, a demonstration that even those cast down by envy could rise, unbroken and unshakable. Meanwhile, Bisi and Sola could no longer ignore the tremors of their own misfortune. Small losses accumulated, and their arrogance slowly turned into fear. The mansion that had once seemed untouchable began to feel heavy with the weight of secrets and lies. Even Kola, who had once loved Zainab deeply, realized the emptiness around him, the absence of warmth, laughter, and love. He began to ask questions that could not be answered by lies, and slowly, the truth that they had tried to bury began to surface, gnawing at their pride. Then came the day when Zainab's name appeared in a Lagos business newspaper. A headline praised her remarkable rise in commerce, highlighting her intelligence, integrity, and community work. Bisi and Sola stared at the page in disbelief. "It cannot be her," Bisi whispered, her voice trembling. Sola's face went pale. They had assumed she would remain small, humiliated, and forgotten. Instead, the woman they had sought to destroy had become a force they could not ignore. Zainab had no desire for petty revenge. Her power was quiet, deliberate, and dignified. Yet, with every article, every business success, every person who spoke her name with respect, the siblings began to feel the weight of their own envy. They had once laughed at her, mocked her, and plotted her downfall, and now they were forced to confront the woman they had underestimated. She had changed not out of vengeance, but out of resilience, intelligence, and an unbroken spirit. The day Zainab returned to Lagos was silent, almost ceremonial, as if the city itself knew the weight of what was about to unfold. She did not come with anger, nor with shouts of revenge. She came with quiet strength, the kind that bends nothing but leaves a lasting mark. The mansion that had once been her prison stood tall, marble glinting under the sun, yet to her eyes it was fragile, like glass that could shatter with a whisper. She had learned patience in Ibadan, resilience in hardship, and strategy in silence. Today, all of it would be revealed. Bisi and Sola were unaware that Zainab was returning. They were busy with their own affairs, basking in the illusion of victory. Kola sat in the living room, restless, the absence of warmth and laughter a constant ache. Mama Kola fussed over small matters, trying to fill the void left by Zainab's departure. But the quiet had changed the air, tension now hummed beneath the family's daily routines, like a storm waiting to break. When Zainab entered the grand hall, the room seemed to hold its breath. She was dressed simply, yet there was an elegance in her posture, a dignity in her step that made the siblings stop mid-action. Bisi's smile faltered, Sola's face paled, and Kola's eyes widened in disbelief. This was not the timid, humiliated woman they had chased away, this was someone forged in fire, stronger than they could have imagined. "Zainab," Kola's voice broke, a mixture of surprise, shame, and longing. He rose slowly, unsure whether to step forward or hide. Zainab met his gaze, calm and unshaken, yet not without compassion. She did not shout, she did not accuse, she allowed her presence to speak louder than words. Bisi tried to recover, forcing a polite smile. "Welcome back," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. Sola stood rigid, unable to form words. The siblings who had plotted, whispered, and laughed at her despair now felt the full weight of their envy, an invisible hand pressing down on their shoulders. Zainab spoke quietly, every word deliberate. "I have come not to destroy, but to show truth. You once thought me weak, a woman who could be humiliated and forgotten. You were wrong. Everything you did to harm me, every lie, every cruel whisper, has not broken me. It has made me stronger." Kola swallowed, guilt and regret flooding his face. I should have listened to you," he said softly, voice shaking. "I should have trusted you." But Zainab did not smile or forgive lightly. She had no need to, for life itself had delivered justice in its own quiet way. Bisi and Sola could no longer stand. Panic replaced arrogance. "What have you become?" Bisi asked, almost pleading. Who are you now?" Zainab smiled faintly, a smile that was serene and terrible at the same time. "I am the woman you tried to destroy. I am Zainab, who walked away from betrayal, learned patience, and turned hardship into strength. You mocked me, envied me, and believed you had won. Look now, the life I have built does not depend on your approval, and your wealth and pride will not save you from the consequences of envy." Adewale appeared quietly at her side, calm and steady, a silent testament to the life Zainab had rebuilt. Together, they were a force of respect, intelligence, and quiet power. The siblings felt the enormity of what they had lost. The humiliation they had inflicted now reflected back at them in the form of a woman who no longer feared anything. Cola's voice broke again. I was blind. I should have loved you, protected you, and trusted you. But even as he spoke, Zainab shook her head. The past cannot be undone, Kola. I forgive only myself for ever doubting that I would survive. You, Bisi, Sola, you must live with your choices. Bisi dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Sola's fist shook as he realized the ruin they had invited into their own lives, not by wealth, but by the cruelty and envy they had carried for years. Mama Kola buried her face in her hands, the quiet of her mistakes pressing down like a heavy stone. Zainab did not gloat. She did not need to. Her success, dignity, and quiet authority were already more powerful than any words of revenge. She turned to leave the mansion, her steps measured, each one echoing with the lessons she had learned: patience, perseverance, and the unshakable power of integrity. The siblings were left behind, haunted by the knowledge that they had underestimated the woman they had sought to destroy. As she walked out into the sunlight of Lagos, Zainab felt a calm she had never known before. She had survived betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak. She had risen from the ashes of envy and cruelty. And she understood the truth that every person must eventually learn: jealousy destroys families faster than enemies, pride blinds even the closest hearts, and patience, courage, and wisdom are the truest weapons against injustice. The city hummed around her, full of life, light, and opportunity. Zainab had learned that strength was quiet, victory was patient, and peace was the most powerful revenge. She walked into her future with dignity, leaving behind those who had chosen bitterness over love, envy over family, and cruelty over compassion. Dear listener, remember this story, for it carries a lesson that touches every heart. Envy, betrayal, and jealousy can destroy even the strongest bonds. But integrity, patience, and courage can rebuild worlds from the ruins. Life may test you, push you to the edge, and let others doubt your worth. But if you endure, learn, and rise quietly, your success will not only shock the world, it will stand as a testament to the power of the human spirit. Before we close this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon, so you never miss tales of resilience, love, and courage. Share this story, comment your thoughts, and stay with us, because the next story could hold lessons just as powerful, suspenseful, and unforgettable.